I have the great pleasure of introducing our special guest speakers today. We are joined by Marie-Dominique Chassé and Alicia Fouchard from the Staffing Redesign Division at the Canada Revenue Agency. I will now pass it over to them to introduce themselves and share their innovative staffing initiatives. Merci beaucoup, mesdames.
Je vais partager mon écran. Alicia, peux-tu juste me dire?
Oui, on la voit.
Oui,
Merci.
c'est bon, merci.
Super. Donc, good afternoon and thank you for the invitation. My name is Marie-Dominique Chassé. I'm the acting director of the Staffing Redesign Division at the Canada Revenue Agency. And I'm joined today by my assistant director of the Project Management Office, Alicia Fouchard. As a separate agency, we're not governed by the Public Service Employment Act, so we have our own separate HR program. That being said, I'd argue that we've been guilty of not fully leveraging that status. Ma présentation se fera principalement en anglais, mais soyez bien à l'aise de poser vos questions ou de formuler vos commentaires dans la langue de votre choix. Je vais essayer de garder la présentation assez courte, quand même si je suis très heureuse d'avoir l'opportunité de vous parler du projet de la refonte de la dotation de long en large. Je suis aussi très heureuse d'en apprendre plus au sujet des innovations en matière de RH qui prennent naissance au sein des autres ministères et j'espère que vous partagerez aussi vos réalisations avec nous. This project started out in 2018 in the wonderful pre-pandemic days, and to be honest, was born out of frustration. Frustration with how long it took to do staffing, frustration with how complicated it was and how limited the services offered by HR were. Frankly, everyone was angry with a process that took forever and left most people annoyed. A pitch was made to drastically change how we do staffing, putting the client experience at the center, not the staffing policy. When the project got approved, we met over 3,000 employees, managers, executives, and union representatives, as well as interviewed over 60 OGDs, Crown Corps, and large private sector entities to drill down to find out what were the root problems with staffing. People were very honest. Turns out they were just as frustrated, if not more so than we were. We got a lot of information which was captured as a What We Heard report, and we posted it on our intranet for all to see. A key success factor for our project was our transparency and willingness to share all the information in a timely manner, the good, the bad, and the ugly. After we finished gathering all that feedback, we developed 54 recommendations, ranging from researching ideas to experimenting concepts to implementing changes. There wasn't one silver bullet to magically fix staffing. We obtained senior management approval and immediately implemented 9 major policy changes. Some of these highlights include removing recourse for permanent lateral moves and temporary lateral move, or as you call them, second months of employment, enacting appointments under 6 months, removing barriers for hiring permanent residents, and we ended the competency assessment at the CRA, which had been around for more than 20 years and was widely viewed as extremely administrative and providing little to no value. Une fois ces changements à la politique complétés, nous avons continué à mettre en œuvre d'autres initiatives importantes, comme la création d'une banque de mobilité nationale pour faciliter les mouvements au sein de l'agence et offrir aux gestionnaires un accès rapide et efficace à des candidats intéressés et répondant à leurs critères pour des opportunités à niveau ou de façon intérimaire. Nous avons réduit le seuil pour la conversion administrative des employés déterminés à 3 ans, plutôt que ce que nous avions originalement qui était 5 ans. Nous avons lancé une stratégie sur la dotation non annoncée pour promouvoir cette option comme étant valide en mettant l'accent sur l'importance de la cohérence et le caractère opportun des communications. Cette stratégie a été développée afin de démystifier la dotation non annoncée en utilisant une approche de gestion du changement auprès des gestionnaires, des employés de la haute gestion. Par la suite, nous avons entamé plusieurs expérimentations importantes à travers le pays et j'aimerais vous en présenter quelques-unes. For these experiments, we've sought many exceptions to the policy, and we've provided additional training to HR advisors and conducted change management throughout the experiments. Before I walk you through the 6 unique experiments that have been launched, I'd like to acknowledge that there were a lot of lessons learned and some bumps in the road to get there. When it comes to implementing these pilots, we've seen cultural differences, and in each of these instances, we've been open, honest, and candid with the concerns. We change and we challenge where we needed to adapt the experiments to the client's needs. The first one I want to tackle is the service delivery model. At a very high level, this model provides a complete service to managers and employees for all things staffing. All internal and external staffing processes and all non-advertised staffing actions are handled by an HR team. We've tested this model in several branches and regions with over 900 managers and 6,000 employees. This model has seen the average time to staff cut in half to just over 80 days, and the average time to create a pool brought down to around 60 days. Additionally, we've seen manager satisfaction jump over 100% when compared against our baseline figures. Second experiment is the dedicated staffing team. This experiment is currently operating in HQ and 2 regions, but also has a national component to help recruit a huge number of auditors. The goal of this experiment is to proactively run large external processes on behalf of the client. The client is very much involved in determining the experience requirements, what they would like to see assessed, and so on, while the dedicated staffing team completes the administration of the staffing process, driving it like a project. With this experiment, we've seen the average time to create a pool drop by 45% and the average time to staff drop by 50%. The third one is the preferred status coordinator experiment. This one was put in place to lessen the manager's administrative burden of checking the preferred status list, or as we call them, the priority list under the PSEA, and remove the stigma associated with those on the list. We essentially created matchmakers whose role is to proactively reach out to individuals with preferred status, ask about their experience and skills, and seek to place them in areas where the business can most benefit. So far, this has been extremely well received, and we've seen a nearly 3-fold increase for the placement for preferred status individuals at the CRA, including the veterans. L'équipe d'acquisition des talents joue un rôle semblable à celui du coordonnateur du statut privilégié, mais se consacre aux postes difficiles à combler ou très spécialisés. This team leverages technologies such as LinkedIn Recruiter and relationships with professional associations from universities or tax and accountant communities to find, and most importantly, hire talent for our to-staff jobs. So far, we've seen nearly 30 appointments, which take about 2 months to complete in total. This is a low volume but high impact experiment. The reaction to this has been very positive, and more sectors have come forward recently asking for the team's help with some of their RT staff positions. The team has also been experimenting with 2 other initiatives, namely the strategic business partner, which is a role focusing on data to support the business, and a new recourse model, which is testing new grounds for recourse, and a new model that aims to reduce the perception of bias, where the second level of recourse is conducted by HR, and the last level is conducted by a committee comprised of HR and managerial representatives, where all committee members are removed from the staffing process that led to recourse. While both of the recourse and the strategic business partner experiments are yielding positive results so far, they were delayed because of the pandemic, and more data need to be collected in order to support a recommendation moving forward. Qu'est-ce qui s'en vient pour la suite du projet de refonte de la dotation? On a présenté nos recommandations à l'autre gestion, puis on est en train de fignoler notre stratégie pour la suite des choses. Notre présence d'aujourd'hui fait partie des efforts que nous mettons à la recherche continue d'idées inspirantes pour le futur de la dotation. Donc, nous sommes très intéressés à apprendre ce qui se fait au sein de vos propres organisations. Ceci étant dit, je suis également à votre disposition pour répondre à toutes questions concernant notre projet de refonte de la dotation. Je vous remercie énormément.
Merci, mesdames. On apprécie énormément la transparence avec laquelle vous partagez votre information. It's always super useful for us to learn from each other. I hear you about not being part of the core public administration. However, there are some similarities, and I'm assuming that you are somewhat trying to align with some of the laws and regulation within the core. And I hear that you've also presented, you were part of the PSC's report last year, if I'm not mistaken, where you showcased there.
Absolutely.
And you've done presentations to the National Staffing Committee.
Yes.
Not a small deal. All right. So thank you for being here today. Merci. Félicitations. I think you're doing amazing work. I had a hard time following the pace at which the questions were coming in my brain as I was going through your presentation. So I wrote a few things down. Et on va prendre des questions des participants aussi. If you have anything through Slido, the chat, raise your hand. Please go ahead. I'm going to start with my own because I'm a bit self-centered that way. Thank you. Donc, Quand on commence un projet de cette envergure-là, là, vous avez commencé en 2018. Ça fait quand même quelques années. Avant qu'il y ait une unité qui soit dédiée à cette initiative-là, j'imagine qu'il y a eu plusieurs discussions, beaucoup de résistance peut-être ou de questionnements par rapport à l'ajout, à la valeur ajoutée. Pouvez-vous nous parler du processus on lance l'initiative, s'il vous plaît?
En fait, c'est ça. L'initiative, elle s'est scindée un peu en trois étapes, en deux étapes, en fait, deux grosses étapes. Puis la phase 1, c'était la phase où est-ce qu'on a fait de la consultation, dans le fond. On a eu l'aval de la haute gestion, on a des comités de haute gestion qui comme tous vos ministères, j'imagine, qui se racontent de façon assez régulière. Et il y avait énormément de frustration au sein, à tous les niveaux, au niveau de la dotation, le temps requis pour la dotation, etc., etc. Donc, c'était vraiment on a fait quelques mises à jour à nos politiques de dotation au cours des années, mais une vraie revue de A à Z, on n'en avait pas fait depuis qu'on a eu le statut d'agence en tant que tel, depuis qu'on s'était mis en place. Donc, il y avait vraiment un appétit, je dirais, au sein de la haute gestion pour, OK, allons voir, allons creuser. Et je pense qu'un des points clés pour obtenir le soutien là-dedans, ça a été vraiment l'étendue des consultations qu'on a faites. Par le passé, on a vu que les ressources humaines, quand ça vient à mener des projets, on n'est pas nécessairement ceux qui ont le plus de crédibilité au sein des ministères. Si on pense, puis on met tout dans le même bateau, Phoenix, etc. C'est pas nécessairement des projets qui connaissent un énorme succès. Donc, quand on a vraiment démontré l'intention puis la volonté que ce projet-là, on le faisait avec le client, pour le client et non pas créer quelque chose HR doing HR for HR. Je pense que ça nous a vraiment apporté énormément de crédibilité puis de soutien, puis vraiment de pouvoir aller démystifier le projet aussi à tous les niveaux de l'échelle. On parle de l'employé, on parle des gestionnaires, des membres de l'exécutif, puis on a inclus aussi beaucoup de discussions avec les membres des syndicats aussi. Donc, vraiment, je pense que ça a été des points clés. Si je peux peut-être faire un recap rapide en anglais. So when we presented at first that idea, when we did the pitch to senior management, there was a huge appetite across the board to completely redesign, let's say, the staffing program, because since we had became an agency, we had done a few updates to the staffing policy and the policy instrument that we had surrounding staffing and HR in general, but not a full review A to Z. Does that make sense? What are the rules that are imposed versus the rules that are legislated? And sometimes, and we're all guilty of that, sometimes we put rules in place because there's this one bad case that happened, and now it becomes the norm for everybody instead of doing smart risk management, let's say, and making things easier for everybody at the end of the day. So there was a huge appetite. And then after that, we built the credibility of the project by doing the extensive consultations that we did across all levels of the agency, the employees, the managers, the executives, union representative. We went outside, and we really showcase it that this is not HR doing HR for the sake of doing HR. It's not an HR project. It's something that we're building with the client, for the client, and they were involved at each step of the way. So, and again, the openness in which we've communicated everything that we found out, like it was a self-assessment on the service that we were providing, and it was not a good assessment, like in the sense that it was not a positive assessment that we did, right? There were so many opportunities for enhancement that we're like, well, no, we're not doing good right now. Let's do it better, and let's see what makes sense instead of just redoing what we've always done in the past.
Thank you so
Si
much.
je peux ajouter juste un point, just to add to Marie-Dominique a little bit, the data analytics were huge here. The numbers speak for themselves, right? So when you look at the numbers and you look at how long it takes you to run a staffing process, you say to yourself, we just went through a pandemic for 2 years as well. Like when you are, necessity is the mother of invention. So you're forced to think of new ways to do business and new ways to do things. And the numbers were a huge factor in that as well. So data analytics for any huge project is crucial to figuring out how to move ahead.
Exactly. And keep in mind that the business of the CRA, for us, it's all about numbers, right? So when we were speaking reporting on the result, reporting on how the experiments were going. One of the key pieces that we did from the get-go is establishing baseline data and a performance management framework for that project. So that was also very, very much key into, okay, well, at the start we were doing this. Now that we're in like 2 years into the experiment or whatnot, what are we doing how we're doing compared to the baseline data that we've established. So that was one of the key success factors.
That's an excellent point that I want to go back to in about a second, but we have a hand up. Amanda, oh, where did you go?
I'm here. I just put my
hey.
hand down. It's okay. So I don't know if people were introducing themselves when they asked questions. Anyway, I'm a P3 acting P4, kind of running a team that's not doing staffing processes right now, but my background is I just came from staffing. So I've been primarily interested in the elimination, I think you said, of like the competency evaluation part of this whole process. I know a few people, I've spoken to a few people who work at CRA, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, like what you guys did in terms of going to like a little bit more of a, I feel like I want to call it a generic model, but not a generic model, in terms of eliminating some of the maybe some of the barriers around assessment.
Yeah, so I'll speak to it a little bit, but not in too much detail because I joined the CRA on the late. Let's say for that, so I haven't experienced the full extent of what the competency program was at first, but je pense qu'Alicia va pouvoir ajouter un petit peu plus à ce niveau-là. But so people were expected for all the positions, there were some key competencies that were specific and there were levels associated to it. And you had to demonstrate it in some ways. There was like a portfolio of competency that you had to develop and everything. And once you had reached level 1, and then after that, you could try reaching level 2, level 3, etc. And you would need a certain level to be able to apply to higher up positions, right? So, but once you were deemed to have qualified at level 2, level 3, that's it. If things happen, you were deemed qualified 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but over the last 5 years, something happened, and actually this competency, you're not demonstrating anymore. But in the system you were, so that's it. There was like, it wasn't making any differentiation necessarily between the candidates or anything. It was very administrative and it was taxing for the people to create all those portfolio of competencies. Alicia, t'avais-tu autre chose que tu voulais rajouter au niveau? Alicia lived it like, she lived it firsthand, I would say.
Yeah. So I was around the CRA when that was introduced back in 2007, and it was mandatory for anybody at the CRA to have these levels in order to be able to apply for positions at higher levels, like Marie-Dominique said. But there comes a point when everybody has them, and then there is no way that you can differentiate between candidates, and they sort of become moot. And there was ways to get them right. So there was a targeted based interview, which was like a telephone interview where you talked to professional consultants for competencies.
Yeah, competency assessor.
To get that, there was the portfolio of competencies, which was a written assessment. So just the opposite of the interview. Some people are better writers, so they spend time writing it. And then there was an observe and attest option where your manager could actually go in and attest to your abilities in the system. And so it became sort of arbitrary, I would think, and added absolutely no value to the system. So at one point, the decision was made, okay, like, what is this doing? And I think back then, this thought was probably already there, like, how are we going to manage this in the future? But it was just at the time what was introduced as, you know, a way to get people in. And you know, those competencies were teamwork and cooperation. They were based on the foundation of the CRA and our core values and things like that. Those competencies were meant to demonstrate what it is to be a public servant in our agency. But there just came a point where it became irrelevant. And so the decision was made to cut them, and we did it as soon as we were able to make the cut. That was the first thing that went.
Yeah, I think also we were treating internal employees differently than an external candidate. Like, let's say we were, correct me if I'm wrong, Alicia, but we were advertising an external process or a process for GDs open. We were expecting those results from the internal employees, but not from the external one, right. The one that were not at the CRA. So there was this disgruntlement. Is that a word? internally too on that we were being a little bit harder on the internal one versus the external people.
Yeah, that's got to be a great challenge. So if we can go back to the baseline and the return on investment for a second, because we mentioned how much emphasis we placed on numbers, I think that more and more we're going to see this trend of using data to inform our decision making. I think it's in everyone's strategy and priority this year. We don't necessarily have the data literacy yet within HR specifically. However, we want to move in that direction and solidify that as a basis for all initiatives that we undertake. So I was curious when you mentioned satisfaction surveys to managers. So when you created your baseline, are you taking a look at how long your processes are taking, like your staffing is taking at every step? Are you measuring drop off? Are you measuring how much time we're investing, how long it's taking, et cetera, and comparing to today to measure the success of your initiative? Sorry, that was a big question. I can.
There's the specifics of the survey. I'll let Alicia tackle that one. But when we established a baseline first, we had some volumetrics that in terms of staffing. So time to create a pool, time to first appointment, things that we were looking at that were specific. They are tracked in our system, like you could gather those data from PeopleSoft, right? But we also needed to have that qualitative assessment. So we went and we created surveys in terms to us, like, what is your current satisfaction in terms of the burden, the process, everything, the advice and guidance with your current services that you're having, and what is the perceived level of administrative burden that you're also that you also perceive with the current process. So we established on a range of 0 to 10. How do you rate your admin burden? And let's say not by heart, but around 8 out of 10 was the level of admin burden that managers felt they were experiencing when we did the baseline. And then compared to today, the ones that participated in the experiment, well, in some areas it dropped to like 4 out of 10. So like it's literally come 50%. And then the administration, the satisfaction with the whole process was maybe at the beginning 4 out of 10, and it's more than 8 out of 10 after the experiment. So there's all those little pieces that came into play. Alicia, au niveau du survey, not the survey, but the time to staff and everything by step, like the planning and everything, did we go into the details for that?
There was mention of, there's some data that's captured easily through our staffing portal. And like Marie-Dominique had mentioned, I'd have to go back and double check that piece. I want to say yes. The one thing I want to say too is I'm not sure how ESDC is set up in terms of their HR, but our surveys were developed with psychologists to make sure that we were measuring what it was we were trying to achieve. So what we think we want to know sometimes isn't what we get based on the question that we ask. And so it was crucial that we set it up with the psychologists, and we had many meetings. And when you're going to use data for comparative purposes, the questions, you have to think about what you're measuring up front, because those questions have to be the same at the end. Otherwise, the data can't be compared. So like your time to staff questions, your burden questions, everything has to be the same. You're looking at, like Marie-Dominique said, what is it today, and then what is it now? And so the questions that we asked, we had to make sure we're going to be able to be asked at the end in order for us to take that data and compare the data sets. So
and we've seen it other types of survey, if I can just add to that, where the questions that we tend to ask are often, they're somehow leading, right? So having that neutral professional person develop those survey for us was really key. And again, with the credibility too, right? We don't want to come out as we're making the data work in our favor, because we've geared the questions toward a certain answer. So c'était vraiment un bon point, Alicia. Thank you.
And how often are you accountable for reporting back? Like, do you have a 1 year, like you must report back twice a year, every year, or it's as you can? Please proceed. You're an experiment.
I want to say that we went back every year, Alicia, to present to CMC.
So to
Or
the
twice a year?
broader management, yeah, it was every year. But for purposes of our experiments, Jasmine, what we did was we actually surveyed people at the halfway point of the experiment. So if it was a year, we surveyed them at the 6-month mark so that we could adapt and pivot the experience. If we saw that things were not working out, we could adjust and move ahead. We didn't want to wait for a year to make any kind of adjustment. For us, it was too long, and we wanted to make sure that we did whatever we could to make it successful. So if there were irritants at the 6-month mark, we were like, okay, what are these and what do we have to do and how do we adjust and move ahead? But for the broader management, we did have an expectation to go back and report every year. But for our experiment partners and the clients and their HR's number one priority. And so it was incredibly important that we make sure people were happy. And so that's why we decided to survey at the halfway mark to make sure that we were meeting their needs and that we adjusted accordingly if we needed to.
Amazing. User-centric, iterative. Love it so much, so much. One last question that's just, and then we'll jump to Slido because people are like, come on, Jasmine, our questions. Are you measuring quality of hire? Like how satisfied are the managers with their hiring decisions beyond like just rapidity?
The one that comes to mind, we did it for the talent acquisition team. For that one specifically, it was lower volume, this one. So the survey is a little bit different because that one, the baseline was a little bit more tricky. There's not really baseline for that one because it's something that didn't exist in the past, but compared, let's say we were saying, trying to staff a data analyst position. And in the past, they tried it and it was like a process that took over a year and it was unproductive. So the data was very extensive. But for those, when we did the survey after the hiring took place, and we did it a couple of months down the line to say, okay, well, we're satisfied with the process, but is the person that we found for you through this new innovative means a right fit for the organization? And we did actually, not only with the managers, we did it with the person that was appointed as well. We sold that job to you. We reached out to you specifically and we sold that job to you. Did we assess right that it would be a good fit for you? And the results were like through the roof, really good on both ends.
That's
and
really
we did it
amazing.
for the other experiments as well, namely the preferred status. Like Marie-Dominique mentioned, that experiment was the preferred status coordinator acts as a headhunter, essentially finding jobs for veterans and people on the preferred status list or the priority list, as you call it in the public service. And so again, we reached out to managers and we had conversation, and it was an individual survey, right? Because you're talking about one person specifically there, and so there is quality of hire that comes out in that survey. And then we talk to the veteran or the preferred status individual, and we ask about the job, and so we get it on both ends, so to make sure that it's the right fit and everything for them. And so we do it, and we've done it for our other experiments as well.
Si je peux faire une petite traduction rapide en français, je pense que c'était pour savoir si on mesurait la qualité de l'embauche. Donc, c'est ça. Il y a deux expériences qui viennent en tête un petit peu plus spécifiquement. Il y a celle de l'équipe d'acquisition des talents, puis celle du coordonnateur du statut privilégié, puis où est-ce qu'on faisait des checkpoints après l'embauche et avec le gestionnaire d'embauche et avec la personne qui avait été placée. Pour vérifier qu'effectivement le fit était bon des deux bords, etc. Donc, c'était vraiment... les résultats ont été comme extrêmement forts à ce niveau-là. Donc, rapidement en français, c'est ça.
Merci. Puis je pense qu'on va essayer de parler plus lentement dans les deux langues, juste pour répondre aux besoins de nos participants. Et on va y aller avec quelques questions des gens dans la salle. Of the 54 ideas you implemented, which ones were easy, simple, yet had a big impact and perhaps even bigger than what you originally anticipated? Et je vais traduire la question rapidement. Donc, des 54 idées que vous avez mises en œuvre, lesquelles étaient simples, faciles et ont eu un plus gros impact peut-être qui avait été anticipé?
Je dirais vite fait. Les 54 idées, je veux juste réitérer que les 54 idées, il y en a certaines qui étaient on implante tout de suite, d'autres qu'on va développer, expérimenter, d'autres qu'on va implanter à un moment plus tard. puis d'autres qui étaient des items de recherche. Donc, ça, on va creuser le sujet un peu plus vite pour des recommandations ultérieures à développer dans le futur une fois que le projet est terminé, etc. Donc, the 54 ideas that we had, they were slotted into implement now, implement during the course of the project, experiment with, or research for further recommendation moving down the line. When we started, so the first phase of the project, phase one, took place in 2018, 2019. And in 2019, when we're like, okay, we have our 54 ideas, let's make the policy change right now. So we did a big policy update in 2019. And there was a lot of impact resulting from that, positive impacts in terms of time to staff burden already, because at the CRA, we were providing recourse on deployment, assignment, term extensions, things that you don't necessarily have in the core. You didn't have in the core necessarily, but we were doing it at the CRA. So just that, since 2019, has had an impact on over 100,000 staffing actions that didn't need to have that administrative burden that came with it, and the adversity that kind of people felt with regards to recourse. Donc ça a été très positif. Les changements qu'on a faits au moment 2019, quand on s'est lancé dans la phase 2 du projet de réforme de la dotation, ça a été des changements à la politique. Puis un de ceux qui est peut-être le plus notable, c'était au niveau de la simplification des mesures de dotation qui n'étaient pas des nominations comme les mutations à niveau, les mutations, comment on appelle ça, oh Dieu, je l'ai même plus en français, PLM, permanent lateral. Les mutations, des mouvements latéraux permanents ou des mouvements latéraux temporaires. Les intérimaires de moins de 6 mois, puis les extensions, les prolongations de durée déterminée. On a enlevé le recours pour cela. Puis on a mis l'accent, en fait, mettre l'accent sur la communication plutôt que sur le recours, parce que ce qu'on trouvait aussi dans beaucoup de cas, ce que les gens ont besoin, c'est pas d'avoir nécessairement du recours, parce qu'ils savent que la mesure de dotation n'est pas biaisée ou quoi que ce soit, mais c'est juste que ça ne vienne pas comme une surprise, que ce soit pas, qu'il n'y ait pas l'impression que ce soit comme caché, que ce soit fait in the background, tout ça. Donc, celle-là, ça a vraiment eu un impact parce qu'on a fait, écoute, la dotation à l'agence, on en fait immensément. Puis je pense que les derniers chiffres qu'on avait sortis pour notre rapport de clôture, je pense ça avait eu un impact sur plus de 100 000 actions de dotation. Fait que ça, c'est un impact quand même assez immédiat. La banque de mobilité nationale qu'on a développée, ça a beaucoup d'impact aussi parce que ça a vraiment étendu la portée des possibilités de mouvement pour les employés, puis ça a étendu la portée au niveau des gestionnaire, des bassins de talent auxquels il y avait accès. Ça a été un petit peu plus long à développer, c'est ça, parce que ça impliquait beaucoup de TI. Il y a eu la pandémie qui a frappé là-dedans, donc on a eu quand même pas mal de délais qu'on a rencontrés dans cette implantation-là, cette mise en œuvre-là. Mais cela aussi, c'est quelque chose qui a eu quand même. Là, je pense qu'on a quoi, 19 000 personnes qui sont enregistrées dans notre portail de banque de mobilité. Donc, c'est quand même énorme. C'est quand même vraiment le fun. One of the big impact, the thing that we implemented that had, I think, a significant impact was the National Mobility Bank that we've developed. This one was not something as simple as a policy change, let's say, because it involved IT development and those take times. And we had the pandemic that kind of put a little delay on everything, frankly. But so far we have about 19,000 employees that have registered to that. So that's like we've really broadened the perspective of employment for employees at the agency, and we've also broadened the availability of qualified candidates that are already interested for managers.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais juste répondre à la personne. Oui, we are offering a recap in French and English because there have been requests throughout the session. So we're just repeating the information in both languages. It took my brain a while to recognize you were doing that, Marie-Dominique, so thank you so much. J'apprécie. Juste pour retourner sur la Banque de mobilité nationale un instant, parce qu'on parle de 19 000 employés qui se sont inscrits. Alors, je suis curieuse, pour ceux qui ne savent pas, ça représente quel pourcentage de votre effectif? Et deuxièmement, on parle de pandémie qui aurait ralenti la mise en œuvre de ce projet-là, mais est-ce qu'il n'y a pas aussi une portion qui aurait accéléré le besoin? Peut-être que spécifiquement à l'Agence du Revenu Canada, comme à EDSC, il y a eu des besoins qui ont explosé dans certains domaines à travers le ministère, où est-ce qu'on a dû peut-être revisiter qui travaillait sur quoi pour répondre à des demandes urgentes. And I will do this in English as well. Just to go back on the National Mobility Bank for a second, you mentioned how 19,000 employees had already registered. And we were wondering for those who are not CRA literate, what percentage of your um, employee base that represented. Also, you were mentioning how COVID had perhaps slowed some of the implementation of this project. And we're wondering if there wasn't also like an accrued need to speed up this kind of project just to address some of the surge capacity issues that CRA, just as ESDC during COVID, departments and organizations found themselves in a position where we had to perhaps take some competencies from here and there to address surge capacity in other areas due to the pandemic. So, mesdames?
Oui.
Oui.
Donc, pour le nombre d'employés à l'agence, je dirais 19 000, c'est un petit peu moins que la moitié. C'est sûr qu'on a une force d'employés un petit peu plus élevée durant le temps des impôts. Là, on booste, nos embauches au niveau déterminé pour la saison des impôts, mais en général, grosso modo, Alicia, c'est à peu près 50
C'est ça, puis en plus de ça, je voulais dire aussi que la banque de mobilité, c'est pas pour les execs. Pas pour, c'est juste gestionnaire et en dessous des gestionnaires, si vous voulez. C'est pas comme les exécutifs et tout ce qui sont dessus.
Ouais, on peut pas. So we cannot staff the exposition through the mobility bank. So yeah, no, we're a huge department. In terms of the need to increase staffing and everything, of course, and I'm sure you guys are also feeling the pressures when it comes to staffing are incredible across the board. Pas juste les pressions au niveau de la dotation sont énormes dans tous les secteurs. Puis on le sait, nous autres, au niveau des ressources humaines, il y a quand même toujours un certain roulement au niveau des PE, des RH. On en a beaucoup. We've seen the pandemic. One of the projects that we also tackled on during the pandemic was a virtual hiring project. So to make sure that the agency was fully equipped to staff at regular rate, even though we were in a pandemic situation. Donc, on a fait aussi un projet qui s'est rajouté à la donne avec la pandémie, qui était le projet d'embauche virtuelle. Donc, c'est de vraiment décortiquer le processus. J'ai envie de dire qu'il y avait 19 étapes, là, puis on parle de sécurité, on parle de TI, du onboarding, vraiment de A à Z, puis s'assurer que tout pouvait se faire de façon virtuelle pour respecter les règles de l'agence de santé. Dans ce moment-là. Fait que c'est quelque chose qu'on a fait en partenariat, pas sur notre côté, mais qu'on a fait en partenariat avec beaucoup de représentants pour vraiment s'assurer que ça allait de l'avant. So that's one of the projects, like really putting it in step from A to Z, like from advertisement, assessment, onboarding, IT needs, security needs, everything, to make sure that things could be done virtually, but at the same rate of hiring that we were pre-pandemic, to make sure that we were able to deliver on all of those new priorities that came forward, right? There was all of those new benefits that came through with the pandemic, and we needed to deliver for Canadians and make sure that we were able to meet the needs of everybody. So we had that added itself to our workload. Puis on a eu beaucoup de... Well, yeah, it was, but it worked, right? It worked, yeah. And we were very successful. There's also we've had increased of the dedicated staffing team. We had one section that was dedicated solely to the hiring of auditors, and we were able to hire. Let's encourage. If I don't have the right numbers, but we were able to hire 1,600. Over the course of the experiment, which is like a small department in itself, right? And c'est on s'est adapté pour essayer de répondre vraiment le plus possible aux besoins des clients, puis s'assurer qu'on rencontre les besoins des Canadiens en bout de ligne.
Malade. Sorry, that's the only expression that seemed appropriate. So to go back to the National Mobility Bank for a while, we're not familiar with it. I know that several departments or organizations have tried to set up a similar kind of how do we match employee talent with employer needs. Is this the case for the National Mobility Bank or is this another tool? Donc, juste en français rapidement, excusez-moi, je vais retrouver le titre en français. Comment ça
La
s'appelle?
Banque de
La
mobilité,
Banque de
Banque de mobilité
mobilité.
nationale.
Voilà, merci cet outil. On sait qu'il y a un appétit accru qui a été mis de l'avant aussi par la pandémie. Comment est-ce qu'on réagence les talents et compétences des employés avec les besoins des gestionnaires? Est-ce que c'est ça le but de la Banque de mobilité nationale ou bien c'était autre?
C'était un peu ça, le but. Comment on l'a bâti, en fait? Encore là, en travaillant avec des représentants de toutes les directions générales, de toutes les régions, s'assurer qu'on représentait vraiment les besoins de tout le monde. On a déterminé les filtres que les gestionnaires seraient le plus susceptibles d'utiliser. Donc, moi, je veux quelqu'un qui a de l'expérience en crypto-monnaie, je veux quelqu'un qui a au moins 5 ans d'expérience avec telle chose, quelqu'un qui a au moins 3 ans d'expérience avec ci, etc. Donc, beaucoup basé sur les critères au niveau de l'expérience, au niveau des compétences techniques, puis au niveau des scolarité, des diplômes ou des formations, etc. Donc, qu'est-ce qui serait nécessaire? Fait en créant ce portail-là, après ça, les employés, quand eux créent leur portail, ils passent à travers les filtres pour dire c'est quoi est-ce qu'ils ont ça, est-ce qu'ils ont ça, est-ce qu'ils ont ça, est-ce qu'ils ont ça. Puis ils se qualifient, mettons, si on y va par un nombre d'années ou quoi que ce soit, ou entry-level, master of trade or whatever, tout ce qui ça, en plus de leurs intérêts au niveau des mouvements de dotation. Donc, moi, je suis juste intéressée à des mouvements niveau, moi, je suis juste intéressée à des mouvements intérimaires, tel groupe et niveau dans telle section. Donc, après ça, c'est vraiment un mix and match avec les filtres. Après ça, le gestionnaire va rentrer qu'est-ce qu'il cherche, puis ça fait un petit peu comme le portail, je pense, F-Swep, où est-ce que tu vois en temps réel le nombre de gens qui répondent à tes critères. C'est juste que là, ça comprend toute la force, toute la main-d'œuvre de l'agence qui est inscrite, qui s'est créé un bassin, pas un bassin, mais un profil de candidat. So, to recap in English, the Mobility Bank, how we've developed it is through collaboration with all of the regions, all of the branches. We've developed what are the filters that managers would like to use, most of them based on experience, technical competencies, and diplomas. And then when the employees go and create their profile for the Mobility Bank, well, they have to put which of these filters apply to them and quantify it in some areas. Like I have 5 years plus experience, or I have just 1 year experience of that, between 1 and 3 years or something like that. So after that, when the managers go in and do their request to see how many people match their needs, well, they have kind of like in the F-Swep portal where they see in real time what is the number of matches or people that have indicated that they have all of those filters in terms of competencies, experience, blah, 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 but have also indicated an interest to work in your specific area as a manager and at the group and level that you're willing to offer and for the type of staffing action that you're proposing. So there are multiple filters. So it was quite complex to develop and to make it, we wanted to make it user-friendly, very easy for the managers. J'ai pas compris.
C'était, je crois, un unmute par erreur. Alors,
OK, c'est bon. Donc, c'est ça. C'est en gros, c'est ça. La banque de mobilité, ça, c'est Alicia Alicia is the brain behind the Mobility Bank. It's our baby. Je ne sais pas s'il y avait d'autres choses que tu voulais rajouter par rapport à la banque de mobilité.
Tout ce que je voulais dire là-dessus, c'est que the Mobility Bank, the intent behind it was for managers to use it if they didn't know who they were looking to appoint. So they need somebody, not like a fishing, like I want to get Jasmine, so I'm going to go to the Mobility Bank and get Jasmine, right? It's they're looking
go
for a certain
according to your
skill set.
needs.
Right. It's going to your needs, and then the list gets filtered through human resources, and human resources liaises with the manager. It's just designed that way. Yeah, we've had a lot of appointments so far as a result of it. We have a lot of data analytics that we've got as a result of it too, reporting that we've built. Meetings, we have lots of meetings about the Mobility Bank, and we've done that since the beginning. The user testing at the beginning was crucial too. Once everything was built, we had to test it for weeks to make sure it worked the way it did before we launched it. And I think that's critical for any technological development. So that's something I would strongly recommend is when you go to launch any kind of new endeavor that's technological in nature, there has to be time and buffer built in for testing. And you have to give yourself more time than you think that you need, because there's always something that comes out as a result of that. And that's what we have learned going through this. It was supposed to launch well before it did. And, COVID happened and other things happened, and that's life, right? And when we worked with it, but testing and having close relationships with your people who are testing was critical to the success of this launch as well.
I hear you. I feel like this event was.
Puis just as with any other piece that we've implemented or experimented with, the change management component of it was critical and continue to be critical. We need to demystify it, because some managers afterward were like, well, now I'm going to lose everybody. Everybody can come and pick up my employees, right? And so we like, okay, well, you know what? And things were happening where managers would just extend offers without speaking to the old manager. Just doing that. So I'm like, well, there's still yes, we're all virtual now, but there's still that professional courtesy. So allow the other manager to plan ahead. Allow this. So there's like a couple of pieces like that. Yes, you might lose your people if they want to develop, but at the end of the day, that's what the agency needs to do. It needs to develop its people and allow them to grow and everything. We facilitated those movements, but we've also facilitated for you to bring other people in when you lose some people. So there's a lot of, Alicia has been doing a lot of presentation to the YPN, to the MGN, the MG network, the manager network, and things like that. So to kind of reemphasize and continue to push this as like a real valid tool for them to use and to explore with.
And right now, at this particular point in time, it's only for internal staffing. You can imagine how massive it would be on an external landscape. So it is eventually part of the plan in the long term. We have some work to do to get there. But right now, it is only for internal employees or CRA employees who are on interchange at other departments.
Awesome. Thank you. On va prendre une question, Madame Martine Chiasson.
Hey, I'm not muted, hopefully.
No, you're good.
So the Mobility Bank, I just had a quick question. So the staffing actions out of the Mobility Bank is just strictly at level or actings. Like there wouldn't be a promotional appointment that is a result of that, unless of course, you act successfully and then they offer you a non-advertised.
They could, it could lead to that, but no, it's for, and I also forgot to say that it's also for students. We're also put our students in there, so there's no promotion per se. We kept it to low risk action, if I can say, for the first launch. Does it mean that it will never be for promotion? No, not necessarily. But we kept it restricted to those.
So that would be
but we didn't put for the acting per se. Like for us, we have I think in the core, you have a distinction between 4 months, less than 4 months, and above 4 months, right? In terms of like what is subject to recourse, merit, or whatnot. So for us, it's 6 months. So we haven't limited the actings to the 6-month piece. Out of the Mobility Bank, you can go for whatever length of acting that you can. So that's one of the flexibility that we've put in place. Donc oui, les mesures, on peut pas, à partir de la Banque de mobilité, il n'y a pas de promotion permanente qui se font. On a maintenu ça au niveau des mutations temporaires ou permanentes à niveau et des étudiants, puis ainsi que les intérimaires. Nous autres, nos intérimaires, il y a la distinction, comme vous autres, c'est de 0 à 4 mois ou 4 mois et plus. Nous autres, c'est 0 à 6 mois, 6 mois et plus. Au niveau de la banque de mobilité, on ne fait pas de distinction. Ils peuvent aller, ça peut être pour un intérimaire d'1 an ou plus, ou ça peut être pour des short-term actings.
Alors, ça serait la différence entre ça puis faire partie d'un bassin, de rentrer dans un processus pour essayer quand on s'intéresse, quand un candidat, quelqu'un à l'interne s'intéresse à
des mouvements à l'interne.
À des mouvements, ouais, c'est ça, que ce serait une promotion.
C'est ça, donc
pour ça, il faut le processus.
C'est ça, ça sera pas à travers la banque de mobilité, certainement, mais en même temps, it's a beautiful opportunity for them to showcase what they can do to managers and showcase their competencies and get themselves known and
La banque, c'est à
expand.
travers tous les départements?
Tous les secteurs de l'agence. C'est seulement à l'agence. On ne partage pas avec d'autres ministères.
OK.
Mais
Les autres ministères n'ont pas encore
non,
adopté ça ou créé leur
il y
propre.
en a peut-être certains qui en ont, je ne suis pas certaine, mais nous, ce qui est différent aussi, c'est que notre système qui gère la dotation, nous, on n'est pas avec PeopleSoft. Vous autres, je pense que la majorité des ministères sont avec PeopleSoft. Nous autres, on a un autre système qui s'appelle the Integrated Staffing System, which is built on CAS. Donc, c'est pas quelque chose qu'il y aurait dans d'autres ministères. Ça serait
OK.
le concept peut certainement être développé ailleurs, mais ça prendrait un autre développement technologique complètement différent de ce qui a été mis en place pour nous. Mais tu sais, comme le front face pour les gestionnaire, dans le fond, c'est des formulaires Java. Donc, c'est pour s'assurer que it's a Java look and feel to make sure that it's user-friendly.
OK, merci.
Merci Martine d'avoir été repêchée plein de petits morceaux dans Slido et dans le chat pour pouvoir tout prendre la
J'étais
parole.
comme vous, j'avais des petites questions qui commençaient à
Si vous êtes disponible pour
s'amalgamer dans mon cerveau.
Ouais, si vous êtes disponible pour faciliter la prochaine session, c'est dans un mois, on se reparle. Merci beaucoup. So we're going to try to end early to leave you all with some time to prep for your next meetings. We didn't have a chance to address all of the questions in the chat and in the Slido. I feel like we need perhaps 54 sessions to address with the 54 experiments. So that may be a thing that we could watch out for in the future. Donc, mesdames, je tenais à vous remercier. Votre partage, votre transparence, votre disponibilité, c'est énorme pour nous. Je pense qu'on a beaucoup de matière à avoir des conversations en continu. Donc, merci. Merci à vous, public. Vous avez été merveilleux, comme toujours. Puis, je vous invite à garder un œil sur nos pages GC Collab, GC Wiki. Keep an eye out for the recordings, the additional material. Everything will be online as soon as we can. Please take a moment to complete our survey. We want to make sure that we are still bringing you topics that you're interested in, giving you useful information and making sure that you have access to all of it in an open, collaborative, and transparent way. Donc, merci beaucoup, mesdames. Everyone take care, be safe, and we'll see you next month.
Thank
Merci,
you.
bonne fin de journée.